Thanks for having me join you today, and for inviting me. If you don't know, Environmental Defense is a Canadian environmental charity. We're based out of Toronto. We work on climate change. We work on protecting the greenbelt and curbing urban sprawl. Those are the two issues that this highway really touches upon the most. We also work on protecting fresh water, and we work on getting toxics out of consumer products in particular. And we work on uh, also solving plastic pollution and getting the government of Canada to follow through on its commitment to ban some single-use plastics. So today we're talking about the proposed GTA West Highway, otherwise known as the 413. Briefly, this is what I'm going to run through. We'll give an overview of some of the issues and the alternatives to the highway. We've got a map that shows the route of the proposed highway as well, and we can see it with a good level of detail. We'll have some time for some questions and answers, which is going to be through the chat box. And then we will, if we have time, do a quick survey, and then finally some next steps and closing. I just want to say that this highway proposal is coming in the context of other environmental rollbacks in Ontario over the past couple of years. One of this government's first acts was to cancel the cap and trade program. They repealed the Green Energy Act. They've made changes to the Endangered Species Act, made changes to the Aggregate Resources Act, and made changes to practically every piece of environmental legislation that is out there. The most recent one was contained in Bill 197, which they passed just before they rose for the summer, which also made changes to the Environmental Assessment Act, and did make some changes that are relevant to this specific project as well. So I think it's important to understand that context, that we have a lot of things happening on the environmental front in Ontario, and we feel a really strong need for us to get organized and to work together and to try to push back and protect what we have in this province. With that in mind, in fact, we have been coordinating a larger effort amongst a bunch of community groups and concerned Ontarians across the province who are working on a variety of environmental issues, working to oppose aggregate pits and quarries, working to oppose this highway to stop habitat destruction and to protect Ontario. And we've been working with local groups across the province, connecting them together and having a forum for people to share their own experiences, to share stories about the things that they're trying to protect, and to learn from each other and build a community of practice. And our aim is really to give constant feedback to our elected officials, to the Minister of the Environment and other important ministers, and the Premier, that we really value environmental protection in Ontario, and we will stand up for environmental protection in Ontario. And it's our expectation that a lot of environmental issues, a lot of things that are being threatened right now, will become a subject of debate as we head to the next provincial election here in this province. And we hope that our elected officials hear how important the environment is to Ontarians, and that they take a good position in terms of environmental protection. And I think that this highway is a prime example of one of the projects that we need to fight back against, something that needs to be raised in local constituencies, and something that I think will become a major issue in the areas through which this highway passes when we head into the next provincial election. So, the highway, let's get down to what is being proposed here. Here's a map, and I have a more detailed map, which we might be able to look at in a little bit. This is a map that we had done up that shows, though, the route of the highway. You can see it starting down at the 401 and the 407 interchange, the 403 there as well, and it heads up across the Credit River, through Brampton, across below Caledon, through Vaughan, and then to the 400 near Kleinburg, and it connects also with the 410 and the 427 as well. This highway is about 50 kilometers long. The corridor is 170 meters wide, so quite wide. And it's only about 15 kilometers north of the underused Highway 407. Also, there's some concerns that, and we know why the 407 isn't used that much. It's because it's a toll highway. There are some concerns that this highway may as well be a toll highway. It does depend on how the government structures the contracts to build it, of course. But if they do go with a public-private partnership or a P3, it may end up being a toll road to finance the project. And it may also prioritize goods movement. That's one of the things that the government has been saying. So it's less about commuters, less about you and I, and more about trucks. We've been engaged in fighting against this highway for some time. In fact, we campaigned in 2017 when the environmental assessment for this highway began, and we raised a number of issues with it. The government started to look into the highway, and they actually convened an expert panel to look into all of the details of the highway. And that panel concluded in 2018 that the highway should not be built. They said it was not the best fit to meet the transportation needs of the region. They also said there was a bunch of alternatives. They recommended a bunch of alternatives of other ways that the objectives of the highway could be achieved at much less expense. And the good news is that the government then of the day stopped the environmental assessment. They pushed pause on the highway because of the growing public opposition to the project and because their own expert panel advised against proceeding with the project. Unfortunately, upon the change of government after the last provincial election, the highway was promptly resurrected in 2018, and the environmental assessment was restarted from where they left off. So not from going back to the beginning, but where they had left off previously with the studies and whatnot, and they're moving forward with it now. We estimate that this highway will cost at least $6 billion. In 2012, the estimates were that it was going to cost $4.8 billion, I believe. And because there's been inflation in terms of construction costs and a bunch of other things, we think it's reasonable to think this is going to cost $6 billion or more, and or more because, well, we don't know how much inflation there has been. Also, every single infrastructure project of this size delivered in this province comes in over budget, usually by about 30% or more. So this is probably going to cost $6 billion, probably going to cost even more than that. It's a lot of money, and we think it could be better spent elsewhere. Things are moving quickly now in Ontario on this highway. So on July 8th, rather, the province proposed fast tracking the environmental assessment in the name of economic recovery. So this was part of that Bill 197 that the government passed just before they rose for the summer session. And that bill actually was another omnibus piece of legislation. This government has introduced omnibus bills multiple times. This one made changes to 20 different pieces of legislation, including the Environmental Assessment Act. And they proposed a different process for environmental assessments. Right now, most projects get an environmental assessment unless they're on a list that says they don't need one. Now they're changing that around to say that that projects will only get an environmental assessment if they're on the list of projects that need one. So it's going to capture much, much fewer projects. In addition to passing this bill, though, they also have a proposed regulation to expedite the environmental assessment, and in particular, allow them to proceed with what they have called early works before the environmental assessment is concluded. And we'll get into some of the details of what that is, but what they are calling early works include the ability to start working on bridges and on footings. And as we'll see, so this means they're working in river valleys and on stream crossings and some of the most sensitive environmental property that this passes through before they actually have completed an environmental assessment. It's pretty backwards and problematic. Also, very recently, the city of Brampton, Brampton city staff have proposed for one of the sections of the highway passes through Brampton, a boulevard concept. So they're talking about a walkable neighborhood with cycling infrastructure and public transit, a more dense neighborhood, not urban sprawl, but something that would be good for transit and where people can walk to everything they need within 20 minutes. Brampton city staff brought this forward as part of Brampton's vision for 2040, their sustainability vision for 2040. And this concept was passed unanimously by Brampton City Council. They have endorsed the plan and are proceeding to work it up. Now, this boulevard goes in the place where the highway is proposed to go. So Brampton has said, we don't want the highway. We would like to have this other development instead. On August 7th, which is the same day that Brampton voted in support of the boulevard concept, the preferred route was announced from the province. We can look at that route as it comes up. They made a few minor changes based on some of the public consultation that had taken place up to that point. And we'll look at where the route goes. And now, I mean, we're having this webinar today, but we have been talking to people along up and down the route, people in Kleinburg and Brampton and Halton. People are learning about this highway. Now they're getting worried about this highway, and they are starting to take actions to oppose it. So why are we concerned about the highway? There's a number of reasons. One is the risks to agriculture. This highway would cut through thousands of hectares of prime agricultural land. As we know, Southern Ontario, this is some of the best agricultural land that we have in Canada, actually, and we're not making any more of it. We've already paved over a lot of it, and we can't really stand to lose much more. We do need that local food production. We need local agriculture. This would destroy thousands of hectares of prime agricultural land, and also take out, we estimate about 1,000 hectares of greenbelt in Vaughan, and would further also lead to the fragmentation of the agricultural landscape, cutting off, routes and pathways that people have been used to using for some time. The environmental impacts of this project are significant. The Toronto Region Conservation Authority estimates there's about 85 different river and stream crossings that this highway would go across. It goes across the headwaters of both the Humber and the Credit rivers, two very important river systems for Ontario. And both of those rivers are actually part of the Greenbelt as well. Those urban river valleys were added to the Greenbelt just a few years ago. They are protected, and they are some of the most sensitive and pristine parts of this province. They're also home to many endangered and threatened species. There's important habitat in those river valleys, in those stream crossings. And there's another concern. I think people have been recently realizing that we apply too much road salt here in Ontario. And if we have highways crossing these rivers, we will be salting on those highways. And that salt gets into the water, it gets into the rivers, and it can actually increase salt concentrations to make the water uninhabitable for freshwater aquatic life. You can get salt levels that are on par with what you'd find in the ocean. Then, of course, we also have air pollution from cars. I mean, we think this highway is going to put more cars on the road. It's going to lead to more pollution, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But more cars on the road mean more pollution. Vehicle pollution already causes over 900 premature deaths in the GTA every year. Adding more cars to the road is just going to make that worse. And actually up near Brampton and around the Pearson Airport is already a pollution hotspot because of the number of vehicles on the roads up there and the amount of exhaust put out by them. This is going to make those matters worse. There will be impacts on local communities from air pollution from the cars. And then also, of course, we have greater contributions to climate change and greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. Transportation is the largest source of carbon pollution in Ontario. Another highway and more cars on the road is going to make that worse. It's going to make it very difficult for this province to meet the climate change goals that they have said they are interested in reaching. The highway also will lead to more urban sprawl. So more cars on the road and more sprawl because of a thing called induced demand. But basically, people would think if you build a new highway, you're going to ease congestion and you're going to make things better. But what happens in reality is that more highways quickly get filled up with more cars because they lead to more urban sprawl, they lead to more development, they lead to more people. And so you're not actually alleviating anything on congestion. You're just actually facilitating more urban sprawl and facilitating more car-dependent communities and more pollution as a result of that. And this has been studied all around the world. I mean, you can look at a place like Los Angeles, for example. that just has highway after highway after highway, and it has done nothing to solve their traffic problem, but has actually just increased the number of people living in the region and the amount of sprawl and the distance that people are willing to drive. So this is not going to be a good thing for the province in trying to stop sprawl. And important context for this too is that the province is also doing a number of other things to facilitate urban sprawl. In particular, they've opened up the Places to Grow Act and are looking at the planning horizon here in Ontario, and are projecting are going to be extending the planning horizon out to 2050 and probably opening the way for a lot more urban sprawl, a lot more development to take place. This has also been done in conjunction with the increasing use of minister's zoning orders, which are superseding the planning process we've had in place here in Ontario for a long time, and kind of just delivering one-off requests instead of following the good process that we have here in Ontario. Because planning matters to our region. It matters for congestion. It matters for transit. It matters for protecting green space and waterways and whatnot. So as I mentioned, the previous government did create an expert panel, and they proposed a number of solutions. First off, they also found the highway was going to deliver very little benefit. They found that the average commuter was going to save 30 to 60 seconds per trip. Very, very little. And given the impact on agriculture and on nature, the panel concluded that the highway shouldn't be built. They actually suggested a number of things that could be done in order to facilitate the goals that the highway was supposed to meet. One was to allow truck priority on Highway 407. We know that the highway is a toll highway, but the panel said if the government paid for trucks to use the 407, that would be a lot less expensive than building a new highway. And that would solve the problem right there. We don't need to build a new highway. We can just get trucks onto the existing highway that doesn't get used. They could also encourage congestion pricing to encourage carpooling and public transit use. This has been a bit of a contentious topic here in Ontario, but it is a good way to encourage behavior change and for people to drive less and to drive more efficiently and to carpool and to use transit and whatnot. They also looked at widening Highway 7 and 9 to get rid of a couple of bottlenecks that are there right now, and some of that work is underway. And then also looked at planning and smart growth and how we don't want actually more urban sprawl. We can't just have endless sprawl and more highways and sprawl and highways. We already have an issue with congestion, and the way to solve that is by building denser communities, by building walkable communities and cyclable communities, and communities that support public transit as well. And I know that people are a bit wary of public transit given the pandemic right now, but we're not going to be in this pandemic forever. We actually do need to be building public transit. It's the only way to get more people moving across the region. We actually put out a report just this morning that looked at some of the issues with the highway and recommended some alternatives. We'll send around a link to it after we're done the webinar here. But we suggested some very similar things to what the panel had suggested. We looked at a bunch of public transit investments that we think could, we actually found that if we invested in enhancing the GO Rail network, as has long been part of the plans, by building some light rapid transit and some bus rapid transit, we could move 4 times the number of people for about the same cost as this highway is proposed to be, and actually move people from where they are to where they really want to go, not necessarily, from the 400 to the 401. We also looked at transportation system management and demand management to improve existing infrastructure. So simple ways to encourage people to use the roads that they have at the right times, to do carpooling and to kind of ease the flow. It's doesn't involve building anything. It involves introducing some practices in place. We also advocated for some more road and grade separations to facilitate goods movement so people aren't stopped at railroad crossings. Again, we really think examining the feasibility of giving trucks priority on the highway 407 makes sense. Examining or widening some of the existing highways, highways 7 and 9 in particular, some of which is already underway, and continuing monitoring and modeling. we know the region's not static and traffic patterns aren't static. And so we want to, continue to monitor things and continue to adjust and tweak things as we go to make sure we're getting optimum outcomes. So I wonder if I can, while sharing my screen here, can pull up this detailed map. Here you see, here's the detailed route. So you can see the highway starts down here near Trafalgar Road at the 407.
Excuse me,
and the
Keith,
407.
we're not seeing the map yet.
Oh, you're not seeing it?
No, it's still the presentation.
All right, let me. All right, you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So here is, and this is quite zoomed in here, as you can see, but I think it's useful for people to see where the route's actually going to go. And you can go onto our website and get a downloadable version of this map that you can zoom in quite closely as well. You can see all in the blue here, these are all the river and stream crossings that we were talking about. Here's the Credit River as well, of course, coming out of Georgetown. The highway starting here at this interchange, basically, and it goes up through here. This is the section that Brampton wants to turn into a boulevard in the north-south section. It's cutting here across Etobicoke Creek, and all of this green here is land that's part of the green belt. Crossing the green belt here again, Campbell's Cross Creek and other creeks. All of the brown here as well. This is conservation areas. So there's conservation areas here and here. Coming across Airport Road and then into the West Humber. Connecting here with the 427, and sorry, I missed the interchange with the 410 up there. And then it comes through quite a section of the Greenbelt here and through some of these conservation areas, in particular the Nashville tract is severely threatened from this proposal. And then connecting here with the 400. These communities, people that are living in here, are pretty spread out right now. And yeah, you can see all the river crossings that this highway would go through. And this is on top of, it's already pretty dense, or just north of already what's pretty dense in terms of the number of highways and the amount of traffic that already exists there. Oops, sorry. I will go back to the presentation here. Okay, so we'll be sending around, as I said, a copy of the report I showed you after this as well for people to look at. We've also drafted a letter. As I mentioned, there's a proposal to fast track the environmental assessment. And we've drafted a letter that we are submitting to the government to say that they should not fast track the environmental assessment, to be proceeding with these early works in those river valleys and in those sensitive places is not a good idea. It's pretty backwards, actually. The deadline for submissions about that environmental assessment is August 22nd, so this Saturday. But we will share that around. And if folks are interested in signing or providing your own comments, we would encourage you to do that as well. We also have a group sign-on letter that we can share that is just a bunch of groups have just signed on to the letter to say that they are opposed to the GTA West Highway. And I would encourage all of the groups who are participating in this call today to sign that letter as well. So this is where we are now, and our plan going forward is we'd like to get more groups to sign the letter opposing the highway. We are going to be holding more information sessions like this and are happy to come and participate. So if you reach out to your networks and you reach out to more people and you gain support and you want to bring people in and educate them, we're happy to help with that. Let us know. We also want to increase the visibility of this project in the communities through which it will pass. We don't think that most people are aware of the highway yet or aware of the damage that it would cause. We actually did distribute some lawn signs back in 2017, 2018, and people were putting them up in their businesses and on their lawns and whatnot. And it helps to increase the visibility of the project in the communities. We also want to engage our elected officials, make sure that they're aware of the highway, make sure that they're aware of the opposition to the highway and the problems associated with the highway. And we want to encourage them to take a stand, to take a position on the highway. And then we want to continue to do engagement with the media. This, again, in the interest of spreading awareness, we need to be getting stories written in the media and television and whatnot. And actually, we put out a press release about our report this morning, and I'm going to be talking to journalists at CBC later today. But I think also there's a lot, it's important for people, you would probably all know, reading local papers in your community, and it's important to hear from local voices in your community as well. So we have the survey now, but I know a bunch of questions have come in through the chat. What do we want to do? We're going to take some questions from the chat now, right?
Yeah, let's have a few questions first, and then we can maybe look at the survey depending on how long the questions go. So if you're ready, Keith, I can start.
Yeah.
So you did speak a little bit about the number of hectares of farmland, but there was also a question about wetlands. You mentioned the greenbelt, but is there any information specifically on wetlands that you might be able to share in terms of how many hectares of wetlands would be paved over?
I don't have that on hand, but the TRCA did a great report looking at some of the impacts in their properties in particular, and they would have some numbers about wetlands. But as I said, like 85 different river and stream crossings, so significant impacts to wetlands for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, absolutely. Thank you. Someone is asking, Dean is asking, is there any link or association between this highway and the Milton intermodal station that is being proposed as well, the CN rail?
There may be. I mean, they do talk about this being for freight traffic, or not just for freight traffic, but that's one of the reasons why they want to build it. And there is also an intermodal hub in Vaughan near the other end of the highway. So there could be a linkage there. That could be part of the planning. But as we said, they can, of course, get trucks onto the 407. We have a highway that already actually goes that route. So there may be a linkage, but it's not the only way to address freight.
Okay. I think you spoke to this a little bit. There was a question from Tina about why the highway was originally needed, and if it was to remove truck traffic, isn't that an advantage?
I mean, good. It's a question as to whether the highway was ever needed, really, right? I mean, it's an old plan that goes back many years, and it comes from a time when, we thought differently about urban form, and we thought that, yeah, of course, we're gonna build a highway, and then we're gonna build more, suburban housing, and then we'll build another highway, and we just keep going forever. I mean, that model of development, we haven't been following that in Ontario for a long time. We created a green belt to stop sprawl. And we also have realized that we need more transportation, we need more public transit, we need more density. And this is the path that the province has been on for some time, because if we just build more highways and more sprawl, we don't solve our problems. We end up with more, we just end up with more traffic, more congestion. I mean, the Toronto Board of Trade estimates that congestion in the GTA costs like $6 billion a year to the economy. And you can't solve congestion by building another highway. You can't, and more sprawl. So there was never really a strong justification for this highway. It just was like part of a plan that is drawn from an older way of thinking about development. But to the specific piece on freight, the trucks should be getting on the 407, and the panel looked at that. I mean, there's two things. One, you could actually break the contract for the 407. This government has shown a willingness to break other contracts, and they could finally free us from the fact that we have this massive toll highway that people don't use, or they could actually just say, fine, we'll pay for trucks to use the 407, and that costs a lot less than building the highway.
Okay, Thank you. There were a couple of questions about the impact of COVID-19 on transportation and whether or not you know of any studies that might indicate how our transportation habits may shift as a result of that and how that might relate to the highway.
I mean, I think it's too early to say. I mean, certainly a lot of people feel like there'll be more working from home and perhaps less commuting, and perhaps less, or some discomfort with public transit. Um, I personally think though, and we've been talking about this, is that yeah, some people will work from home more, but I think people will return to offices and workplaces, in part because they like it, and actually it is better to be there. So I think, and this our area is still, like the Southern Ontario is still expected to add a lot more people. And I think that long term, we're not going to see significant changes as a result of COVID. I could be wrong. I don't know if anybody, I don't know that we know yet, but I do know that people are interested in studying it for sure. But I think we can't have a definitive study on what are the impacts of COVID and the pandemic on transportation patterns.
But it's probably going to be studied. I expect you're right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It'll be
Yeah.
studied for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Gloria asks, there are many municipalities that have declared climate emergencies. Do you have a strategy to reach out to impacted communities to ask that opposition to this highway maybe be part of their climate action plans?
Yeah, I mean, Brampton City Council, when they endorsed the Boulevard plan, they made reference to that fact that they have said there's a climate emergency and that building a new highway is inconsistent with that. I think that municipalities along the route are divided. Some of them are in support of the highway and some are opposed. We haven't done any specific outreach yet to municipalities that have passed a climate emergency motion, but that's a great idea. And we definitely have plans to reach out to municipalities to educate them about the projects here and about how this is inconsistent with the climate emergency.
Great, thank you. Karen mentions that the once named Mid-Penn Highway was stopped, but figures there's a great chance that the government will try to connect the dots and extend the 413 from Milton through Burlington to Hamilton, Niagara. Do you think that this might be a possibility, or do you have any insights on that?
It sure could be a possibility. I don't know. I do know, though, that on a call we had earlier this week, there were some people that joined who were who live to the east of Highway 400, and why they joined is because they're worried about this highway being continued across the 400 and down to the 401 on that side and the 407 on that side. So I mean, yeah, there's a concern that this highway, it begins with this 50-kilometer section, but it could be continued, and it could be continued in either direction or both.
Okay, great. Sorry, someone mentioned that I might not be speaking loudly enough. I apologize. I'll try to speak up. I see a few questions here asking about who's in favor of the highway, who supports it. If there are so many pieces of opposition, where's the interest in this highway coming from?
I mean, my understanding is some people do support it because they think that this will help ease traffic congestion. As I mentioned earlier, the studies say otherwise. The studies say that as soon as you build, or very quickly after you build a new highway, it gets filled up with new vehicles and new congestion, and it doesn't solve the problem. And this has come to, it's because of research done around the world, actually, that this phenomena happens time and again and again. And actually, there's a good study we can share with people if they want. It's referenced in our report about this thing called induced demand. But that's the reason people would support it, is they see that this might help solve traffic. They might not also be able to imagine another way for this region to grow and for more people to come and live here. But the model we have to follow is like what they're doing in Europe, where there's much more density, where there's enough people for public transit, where also shops and workplaces are close to where people live, so they can bike there or they can walk there. And that's the model that Brampton has put forward in their Boulevard plan. I think there are some other people that are supportive of this. This government did hold a forum for the aggregate industry. So they had a retreat, actually, in community groups. Gravel Watch and other folks that have been fighting against pits and quarries asked to come to this aggregate forum. They were not allowed to go. So it was a closed door meeting between the government and between aggregate industry, so gravel pits and quarries. And their goal was, how do we create more jobs in this industry? Not that we need them, but that was what they sought to do. And they have since made a number of changes to provincial legislation, to change the Endangered Species Act, to change the Aggregate Resources Act, to change the Planning Act, to facilitate more development of aggregate pits and quarries. And I know that some folks in Burlington are fighting a quarry on Mount Nemo. People are fighting a quarry up in Brampton. There's a lot of these. So, but they stand to benefit, right? A road will take a considerable amount of the crushed stone to lay the bed, plus the concrete and asphalt. It's a big construction project. And anybody that supplies the materials or does the work would stand to benefit from this. And in part, the government is talking about speeding up the environmental assessment because they think that this is a good way for us to have an economic recovery following COVID. So they're not thinking about a green recovery here in Ontario. They're thinking about very much a brown recovery, very much an old school perspective on this stuff. Also, developers stand to benefit. There are people who bought up this land, as speculators, thinking that this is going to allow for more development, it's going to allow for more urban sprawl, and that when I can tell you that my property is located, within 2 minutes of the highway, that means its value is going to go up. So developers who have already bought this land, and also developers who, this government has done a number of things to help developers. They're passing these minister's zoning orders that totally circumvent the planning process. They're making changes to the Places to Grow Act and the Growth Plan, again, to encourage more development. And we do know, we will remember during the lead up to the election that the government, the premier actually had said he was going to open up huge swaths of the Greenbelt to development. And he has now had to walk that back and insists that he is the defender of the Greenbelt, but is still very much pro-development. And so I think they stand to benefit. And then some municipalities would benefit from that too, because they would get some more money from development charges and perhaps more money from the tax base and whatnot. But the environment and the people that live in those communities already, they're the ones that are stand to lose from this, and we need to speak up.
Okay, thank you. There are lots of suggested reasons that popped up in the chat box as well for anyone who wants to also check those out. Mary's asking if you have any thoughts on possible indirect impact on the city of Hamilton. Should we be looking further west?
Well, I guess if the highway does extend down that way, it could be an impact there for sure. I don't really know. I know that people in Milton, though, where the highway ends right now, are getting concerned, obviously. Okay. Maybe someone here from Hamilton has an opinion on Hamilton.
Feel free to put your hand up. Maybe somebody would be able to do that, or pop it in the chat box. Sorry, just trying to catch up here. Has any research been done recently around the extensions to the 407 and the 412 to document increased sprawl and environmental impacts? There was a lot of work done, particularly on the east end there.
I'm not aware, but there could be. It's a good question to raise, and a good we should look into that because it would obviously help make our case about how this will lead to more sprawl.
Okay. Okay, I feel like we've gotten through most of the questions. Anything else that people want to ask, feel free to pop that into the chat box. But I see that Lisa has the Mentimeter survey details up on the screen as well. If you haven't already done that, it's 3 very quick questions. And how to go about doing that is to go to a new page and enter mentee.com and then use the code 8931100, and that will get you to a few quick questions. It's also in the chat box if you want to copy and paste that code, if that would be easier for you. And I'm being told I just missed a question. Just a second. I remember seeing it. Oh, does the Brampton Boulevard project support or detract from this highway project?
I think it takes away from the highway project. It is in the middle of the highway, and I think there's a report from a planning firm that came up with the the concept, and they were arguing that it was compatible with the highway, that they weren't opposed to the highway, and they just wanted one stretch of it to be different than the rest of the highway and slower than the rest of the highway. But Brampton City Council, when they discussed the plan, very much understood that the boulevard and the highway are incompatible. And for Brampton, what they said, one of the things that they said when they were discussing it is that, the boulevard means that people are shopping at local stores, that people are living in the communities that people want to live in. Increasingly, they have more housing with the boulevard plan. They have more vibrant community. And whereas with a highway doesn't mean that people are coming to Brampton. What it means is that people are traveling through Brampton. And so they didn't see any benefit of a highway crossing through Brampton. And Brampton should know, because they already have the 410, which does cut right through the middle of Brampton. And they know how divisive that is in the city. They know how it has kind of split them into two, and that another highway would just do that again. So it is incompatible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do you respond, Keith, to the rhetoric that people want single family housing when we're promoting denser developments now?
Well, some people do, but some people don't. A lot, if you look at the condo boom in the city of Toronto, a lot of people have been moving back into the city and have been moving into more dense urban neighborhoods. And there's a lot of employers who know that if they want to have millennials working for them and certain people working with them, that they actually need to be downtown, because that's what people want actually to have as well. There's no shortage of single family homes either, is the truth of it. And in fact, the planners who look at this stuff believe that because the boomers are getting older and many of them will soon be looking to downsize, that in fact there very soon a glut of single family homes that boomers, by which I mean baby boomers, of course, but that they have freed up as a result of downsizing and moving into condos or smaller homes and whatnot. And so, the planners think, in fact, there's way too many single family homes and will be too many single family homes.
Okay. Chris is asking, how much of the highway budget would we need to spend to get the 407 back under public control?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. This government has passed so they ended a bunch of green energy contracts, and they were going to tear up the contract with the beer store. And they also passed a law that said it is illegal, or you can't sue this government for breaking contracts. They haven't talked about the contract with the 407, but I imagine there would be some penalties, but they probably could just actually tear up the contract and walk away from it.
Okay.
But the green energy contracts that they canceled did end up costing, I think, $230 million. But even still, that was to tear up multiple contracts for projects that the government had endorsed and were already underway. And also, this highway is, we estimate, $6 billion, right? So 250 million, 230 million sounds like a lot, but it's a fraction of $6 billion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's about it for the questions. There are several different comments that are in the chat box as well that people are welcome to take a look at. People are definitely asking about action. How do people get engaged in this and express their opinions and views about it? So I think that's something that Keith has offered, and it will be followed up upon with another message afterwards. Is that correct? Or did you want to review anything there, Keith?
No, I think, we will follow up with some more stuff. We would encourage, we have a website up that you can go to that if you just Google Stop the 413, you'll find it. We have a report that went out today, which we will share with you. And I think we can also share some actions people can take about this plan to expedite the environmental assessment. And I think we're going to be sending out a poll as well as this one we have right now, which kind of will ask people a little bit about what kinds of things you're interested in doing in your community to help stop this highway. But we'll be sending out a poll and also kind of understanding people's level of interest in taking lawn signs and doing other things like that we can do to push back against the project. I should say also, in terms of timelines, this Saturday the consultation closes on the expedited environmental assessment, but the rest of the environmental assessment is still proceeding. When they were supposed to have announced the preferred route in May, they only did so in August, so they're behind their own schedule. They have not posted yet a revised schedule, so we don't know when the project will be completed, but originally the plan was for this environmental assessment, sorry, my dog. The environmental assessment was to be concluded about 2 years from now in the summer, so it was actually going to go after the next provincial election. We think that the expedited environmental assessment is an attempt to get early works underway so that there are shovels in the ground and construction taking place before the next provincial election. But that said, so we do need to do what we can do to stop that, because it'll become much harder to stop the project once work has begun. But we also think we do have some time here. We don't need to stop this month. We have some time to organize, some time to get ready, some time to push back. So this is just the beginning.
And Sarah has also put a link into the chat box, a tool that lets you email comments to the province and copies your MPP, Transportation Minister, and Environment Minister. That can be helpful, I think, for reaching out and expressing your views. Okay, well, thank you very much, Keith. That was really informative, and I hope that everyone was able to get their questions answered and learned something about this project today. We also want to express our gratitude to all of the local organizations that supported this event and helped to promote it. That includes Burlington Green, the CFUW of Georgetown, the CFUW of Oakville, Faith in the Common Good, GASP, which is Grandmothers Act to Save the Planet, Greening Sacred Spaces, the Halton Environmental Network, Halton Food, Halton Green Screens, Halton Hills Climate Action, Oakville Green, the Small Change Fund, Sustainable Milton, and the Climate Reality Project for Canada. We really appreciate all of these groups' support of this initiative today, this webinar, and for promoting it. We had an excellent turnout. We're really pleased to see everyone who was able to join us, so thank you so much. Again, if you want to reach out to Laura at Environmental Defense for more about this project, how you might be able to get involved, what other things they are doing in relation to it, you're welcome to reach out to her. Her email is available here. In addition, you can connect with Environmental Defense through their webpage, their Twitter account, Facebook, or Instagram, also on this slide. This session has been recorded, and if you're interested in getting a copy of that recording, please feel free to pop your email address into the chat box. And we do plan to reach out with a follow-up notice to anyone's, however you register for this account, we would follow up with an email as well that provides some of the links that were mentioned today. And I think that's it. So thank you everyone for joining us. We were able to finish this up in less than an hour. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Our pleasure.